Okay, so everyone, you are very welcome to this afternoon's event as part of the Dublin Festival of History. Thank you so much for joining us online for it. My name is Emer Hegarty. I'm a senior librarian with Dublin City Libraries, and I'm delighted this afternoon to be joined by Dr. Kathryn Milligan, or Katie, as she's known to her friends, of which we will be by the end of this session. So thank you very much for that. Um, I'm really looking forward to this session myself. If you are not yet familiar with Katie's book, Painting Dublin, Visualising a Changing City, 1886 to 1949, run, don't walk to your local public library because it is sumptuous. It is beautiful. And Katie has promised us a visual treat for this afternoon as well, which I'm delighted for. The very best thing about it being a Zoom event is that there is no one blocking your view. So you'll get to see everything up close and personal. You can put your nose as close to the screen as you like and soak up all of those details because Dublin, our beautiful city, is fantastic to see represented in many different art forms. And I'm delighted that Katie's going to chat us through it. Katie, I'm going to hand over to you now. I'll keep an eye on the chat and we'll join you back for questions towards the end.
Thank you so much, Emer. I'm just going to get those pictures up on your screen. Okay, hopefully everybody can hear me and hopefully everyone can see the slides. So I will just give it a minute, okay? But I'm sure it's all fine. It's absolutely lovely to be with you on this sunny-ish evening in Dublin. There's some lovely autumn light outside my window as I speak. This is, I think, my fourth or fifth time speaking at the maybe fourth time speaking as part of the Dublin History Festival. So thank you so much to all of the organisers for having me back again. So this evening we're going to focus on the life and work of Walter Osborne. Osborne is an artist who many of whom paintings were rooted in the observation of Dublin, the city, and its citizens. And we're going to walk through some of those and enjoy the vision of the city that he presents to us, going back to the kind of late decades of the 19th century. Osborne, if you visit the Hugh Lane or the National Gallery of Ireland, you'll know some of his works and what a brilliant painter he is. But I hope there's also some of you who aren't familiar with Osborne, and so I hope you enjoy getting to know his work a little bit better as well. So let's meet the man himself. This is a photograph of Walter Osborne, taken, we think, around 1890, maybe a few years earlier in the late 1880s. And we think it was taken in his studio at his home in Rathmines, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But if we just look at the photograph itself for a minute, what kind of person do we think Osborne might have been? He's sitting in a very smart, tailored suit, lovely crisp collar and his sleeves and his very kind of finely pointed and well cared for moustache. He's looking directly out at the viewer in his chair, kind of nice and upright. And the background of the photograph, we see the studio door, and then we see his works in progress on the back wall. So things, works on paper, in mounts, and kind of rough sketches still on the wall in progress. We see lots of objects, even if we don't see them in great detail, we can tell we have things like little pieces of ceramic. We have other kind of painting paraphernalia, maybe his smock here, this bunch of fabric in the upper left-hand corner. I always think that the way Osborne is looking at the camera is that it's likely that he had set up the camera himself and is either taking the photograph, posing for the photograph, and operating the camera himself, or with a close friend. So it does have, we might call it today a little bit of an air of the selfie, but he's definitely presenting himself to us as an accomplished artist. So Rathmines was where he was born and where he spent most of his life. This is a slightly later photograph, maybe from the early 20th century, but many of you will recognize it as the busy main street of Rathmines today. And just down here on the right-hand side of the photograph, we have the turn down to Castlewood Avenue. Walter lived there with his parents. These are two portraits he painted of his father, William Osborne, and his mother, Anne Jane Osborne. William Osborne was also a painter, so it was a family business, and William would have been very well respected as a painter, particularly of animals and horses, so dogs, horses, cats, and he would have, been very well regarded in his own day, even if they're not very fashionable paintings now. Um, and the Osbornes had four children, three of whom survived to adulthood. So their eldest son was Charles Osborne, who again you see here in a portrait by Walter. He later joined the Anglican Church. And he also had a sister, Violet Osborne. And this is one of my favorite paintings, I think, if I could have something on my wall at home. This is a portrait by John Butler Yeats, who would have been an acquaintance of the Osborne family and painted in 1991. We're going to come back to Violet a little bit later on, so I won't tell you too much about her now. This was their home on Castlewood Avenue. This is me outside their house. So their house is this one here, number 5, with this plaque on the beside the door. So this was later added to mark that Walter Osborne had lived there. What's fantastic about this house is that we know that when they moved there, it was quite newly built. And we have a sense of the rooms and how it was laid out because it was advertised for rent in Saunders' newsletter around the time they moved in, so the mid 1840s. So we can see it has a large kitchen with a range, 2 pantries, I think a scullery, 2 parlours connected by a handsome hall, a drawing room and a bedroom story with 4 excellent bedrooms, bathroom and a water closet. And of course, having the inside bathroom would have been still something of a novelty at this time. We see that the ad also mentions that there's a beautiful garden. That's going to be important later on, and it has a pump and a tank for rainwater. So we can see from the cost and from the size and the layout of the house that the Osbornes were a very kind of well-to-do, firmly kind of middle or maybe even slightly upper middle class family, and very much settled within Dublin. If I just go back to this photograph of Walter for a minute, just to tell you a little bit more about his training before we start looking at some more of his paintings. He first attended the Royal Hibernian Academy schools here in Dublin, and then he was awarded a scholarship, which meant he could go to Antwerp. Antwerp had become really popular with artists from Ireland and from Britain as an alternative to going to art school in Paris. Antwerp was attractive because it was a little bit cheaper than going to Paris. And also then the classes were in English, so you didn't need to speak French. And you've got this great group of artists who all get to know each other in Antwerp. And what also draws them together is that they're really interested in kind of French naturalist painting and really looking at everyday life, genre scenes, depicting everyday people, everyday scenes. They're not so much interested in that kind of kind of impressionism or paintings of modern life. There's much more of an earthiness to their subjects and to their palette, to the colours that they're using as well. And this is what we see Osborne bringing back to Dublin. Now, so let's look at some of his early paintings. And I know you're thinking these aren't paintings of Dublin, but they kind of are in their own way. So we know that when Osborne came home from Antwerp, a theme that he comes back to again and again are paintings of children, like this one that we see here, a boy blowing bubbles. This one is from 1885. It's a really beautiful painting. It's very small. It's actually on display in the National Gallery at the moment, if you are able to get in and have a look at it. It has those earthy tones that we would expect. And it's showing a boy in kind of not ragged clothing, but certainly very humble clothing. And he has a bow and a pipe, and he's looking at this bubble that we can see here in the top part of the painting. If you look behind, we see these kind of frame or these kind of prints, maybe pieces of paper, very like what we saw in that studio portrait. We see these beautiful kind of little dots of paint, so quite thickly painted, but again in that very kind of earthy palette. We know from diaries by Osborne that for these paintings of children, and I'll show you some more now, is that he drew his models from around the city. In some cases, he gives them their names and addresses. So just to give us a little bit of the geography, if we think of Osborne up here in Rathmines on Castlewood Avenue, his models for these paintings were coming from, around the Coombe, Patrick Street, down on the Quays, up around kind of Capel Street and the North Inner City. So they are portraits. They're not named as portraits, they're not presented as portraits, but these are pictures of Dubliners who Osborne paid for sitting for his paintings and whose names maybe we don't really remember in the history books today. This is another one of these paintings, so I'm going to show you just three, just to give you a sense of the themes that start to emerge. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given his father's occupation, he was very good at painting animals and seemed to have a little bit of a predilection for painting cats as well. They're always full of character in his work. So this one is called Cupboard Love. So we see the cat here looking longingly at whatever this boy is having from his bowl. Lovely kind of still life details. And again, I'll just show you a few of those. We can see, again, the prints on the wall, the objects on the shelf, the orange and the knife here, and the way that he's painted the tablecloth. And this might be one of my favorites. This is Girl Feeding a Tortoiseshell Cat from a little bit later, from 1887. So we see the background has become more complex. There's more detail. But again, they're things we've seen before. So the prints and posters and things on the wall, but this beautiful vase of flowers and the tortoiseshell cat being given something delicious from this bowl, maybe some cream or milk or something. So there were kind of things that Osborne is doing with these works. The first is that they were models that he could get to the studio that were probably reasonably affordable. It gave him a chance to develop his skills at these kind of portrait and genre paintings. But also they were very much sought after. So these were really popular subjects with the art market at this time. And so he would have exhibited these works in Dublin, maybe in London, in Birmingham, in Liverpool, until they sold. And they were something that people were really interested in. Just to show you one final portrait, this is, I suppose, in a similar vein, but it shows a friend rather than a model. This is a portrait of Stephen Gwynn, who a journalist, author, later politician, and kind of historian as well, I suppose. And I liked including this one because if you see the blue vase here behind him, we also see it here. So he's reusing those objects from the studio. This Gwynn later recalled sitting for this painting, and I have a quote here where he says that he remembers the studio table littered with brushes and palettes, and a wall roughly papered with sketches. All this detail is ingeniously suggested, and finally the gold mount of one sketch is so placed that the representation of its gilding lies up against the gilt of the frame. A little touch of swagger whose success amply justifies it. So he's talking about this here. This is a very particular type of frame, and it was made popular by the painter of this work. This is Thomas Carlyle, painted by James McNeill Whistler, whose work was exhibited in Dublin in 1884 and who Gwynn and Osborne were big fans of. And so I just wanted to show you this because, again, if we think about these interiors that Osborne is doing, he's thinking about Whistler, how you pose a subject in a space, what you include on the wall, and he's bringing that all of this international European painting in to Dublin. So that's a little bit of background on Walter Osborne. Let's get to the city streets and the real kind of meat of his work in the city. So we'll start first again with a photograph. This is of Patrick Street. And so Osborne did a series of paintings of Patrick Street, and we're going to look at those now. But I just wanted to read you very quickly a description of the area because it really looked very different then than it does now. So when we think of Patrick Street now, we think of that wide street, St. Patrick's Park, the cathedral. When Osborne was painting there, it was before all of those changes that were made at the close of the 19th century. It was full of narrow streets, tenements, and a lot of poverty as well. And we'll see that in his paintings. In 1853, Charles Dickens visited this area. He had come to Dublin to visit the Irish Industrial Exhibition, but he goes all around the city. And when he came to this area around the cathedral, he wrote that one, and particularly to Patrick Street, he wrote, one side is occupied by a manifestation of the old clothes interest, the other by a continuous line of stalls for the sale of butcher's meat and provisions, the stalls being overshadowed by projecting bulkheads prodigiously productive of chiaroscuro, picturesqueness, rottenness, and ginginess. This and the neighbourhood are the most ancient, raggedest, dirtiest, wretchedest part of Dublin's proud city. And so we see some of that even in this photograph, the stalls, the bulkheads, and the winding street up. Now, I think Dickens saw this as, maybe a very unsalubrious, a little bit of a down at heel area. But of course, for an artist, it was full of life and full of character and full of subjects that could be painted. So the first painting that Osborne does of this area is this one here, quite widely reproduced. So some of you might have received it as a greeting card at some point. But this is called St. Patrick's Close, an old Dublin street. And Osborne first exhibited it in the Royal Hibernian Academy in 1886. It shows the street looking down towards the cathedral, so kind of the opposite of the way we were looking in the Robert French's photograph. And it is full of those things that Dickens was mentioning. We have old clothes, we have markets, we have butchers. I'm going to just again do my little zooming trick. Now it's not quite as crisp, but we have butchers, markets here, we have horses, we have people. If you look here, we have a fish stall. There's that bundle of old clothes, some bric-a-brac, and of course, then this great view down to the cathedral spire as well. So when we think of, the visual and the written description of it, we can get a sense of maybe the smells, the sounds of this really bustling city street. We know again from his diaries that Osborne went to this area a lot. He wasn't basing this on imagination. He attended services in St. Patrick's Cathedral. He sketches on the street, and so he knew it. He spent a lot of time there. We also know that again he photographed it, and so Osborne is really one of the first generations of Irish artists who have not just their sketchbook to rely on, but also their camera. And so we know he went out, he was part of kind of the photographic circles in the city. They would go out usually quite early in the morning when there was that really bright sunlight to help them take their photographs. So we have 3 photographs in the Walter Osborne archive showing roughly the area that this painting is based on. So looking down the street towards the cathedral spire here. This is the third one, and this is the one I think he really drew on for the painting that we've just seen. If you look at things like this hipped kind of shop front here, and this bag of clothes, I'll go back to the painting now in a moment, the bag of clothes here. And I also want you to just look very closely here, and maybe I'll zoom in on that as well. Here in the photograph, you can see there's a gap, okay, where the gables break, where this building isn't as tall as the rest. You'll also notice just how far away the cathedral looks in this photograph. If we go back to the painting, so you can see he's made a few small changes and he's brought some things directly over. So there's that big bundle of clothes directly translated over. There's that quite characteristic kind of shop front. But where there was a gap, he has used a little bit of artistic license here, and he's put in 2 of those Dutch Billy gable ends, so something very characteristic of this area into it. And of course, he's changed the perspective a little bit to bring the cathedral a little bit closer. So this was his first engagement with the street in paint, but it wasn't the last. And he was interested in looking at the street from both ways. So I'm going to take them, I think, roughly chronologically. This is the next one from 1891. And this is a little bit further back down the street, a little bit like the photograph we saw a few minutes ago. And we're looking up towards Christchurch Cathedral rather than down towards St. Patrick's. And this work is called Rags, Bottles and Bones. But again, we get lots of great detail. So if we take the foreground of the painting, we have this group of children. They're gathered around this man who's maybe selling kind of toys, again, bric-a-brac to them. They have maybe a tumbler or glass or something here, but they seem to be watching with great interest. And they have, I think there's a little horse or something here that you can pull along. Lots of color. Again, all of these stalls in the background really showing the sunlight and how it's coming down through the street. Very hard to see on the slides. You'll have to take my word for it. But on this sign here, it says J. Clark Rags, Bones, and oh no, Rags, Bottles, and Bones. And so that's where the name of the painting comes from. You have here this little figure of maybe a, I don't know if it's a sailor or a king, that was also a detail in that photograph, and then of course the cathedral spire at the top here. If we just look at this painting as a whole, you can see that in the intervening years, Osborne's use of color has changed. It's a little bit brighter, not quite as cluttered in the foreground. So he's improving and changing his way of painting Dublin as he goes through this period. There's a lovely warmth and richness to the colouring here. Little bit different here. Now, this work that you see on the left-hand side of your screen, this is a pastel, an oil pastel, rather than a oil painting. And unfortunately, in the 1820s, it was damaged in a flood in the stores in the Tate Museum in London. And so it's probably a little bit murkier than it would have been. But it's a very, the pastel gives us a real different texture to this. This is called Life in the Streets, Hard Times, 1892. And it's, impossible to escape the idea that maybe he was drawing on Dickens' novel in naming this painting. But he's showing us, that it isn't always a very happy or very sunny side of the city. You have, again, the stalls, the market. This figure here at the front is very similar to our figure that we see here in Rags, Bones and Bottles. We have the great detail of the oranges and apples here, lovely detail of the basket. And again, we're looking up this winding street and up the hill towards Christchurch. Over here, these are two sketches, and maybe I'll zoom out for a moment. These are two sketches of the street. So he's practiced the basket. So when we look at these sketches, they're small. They're kind of this kind of size. They're pocket-sized. He would have been on the street sketching the little basket that we see here, and the cart here, its wheel, even the drain. Okay, the drain that we see here, you can see he's sketching in this as well. And then also he has kind of notes here about the different colors and the chimneys, the windows, the fruit that he's seeing, all contained in these sketches. It's kind of interesting that this work ended up in the Tate, and you can see here that it was presented by the trustees of the Chantry Bequest. And for this work in particular, we have a great timeline and a great story behind it. So we know from his diary that Osborne started thinking about this scene, this artwork, on the 11th of January, 1892. And he finished it. He makes a note that he has finished the scene of St. Patrick's on the 17th of March. So a really great date to finish it. He very quickly sends it over to London to the Royal Academy exhibition there. And by the 19th of July, he had received a check for its purchase from the Chantry trustees. So the Chantry Bequest had been set up as a purchasing fund in honour of a British sculptor, and they acquired works for the British National Collection. Osborne was the first Irish artist to be included in the collection, and they were later all transferred to the Tate. So it's really great. This is the kind of thing, as art historians, we love to have that sense of how long it takes for a painting to be created and then where it goes afterwards as well. The final work then I want to talk about on in St. Patrick's, or in that area of the city, is this one here. This is called the Fish Market, Patrick Street, from 1893. A little bit different to what we've been looking at so far. So rather than that long stretch up either side of the street, we're very much focused here on the the street itself, the markets, and the different kind of businesses and people who are working on the street. We have the fish seller here with the stall in front. We can see here in the background we have these collection of straw or wicker baskets. We have a butcher shop. Again, I'll just zoom because this is one of my favorite details. This is a hat stall, and we have separate sketches of each of these elements, but I always enjoy the hats here, just to show you there's the butchers, a long way from our refrigerated butchers, and the different baskets hanging up here. Now, what our eye is really initially drawn to the fish cellar, so beautifully painted, and this is a great image of the painting. So it's the next best thing to seeing it in person. But here we have all of the different fish. This looks like a big piece of plaice or something, maybe some mackerel, a bunch of spring onions here to go with it. Really beautiful detail again in the kind of ceramic and earthenware here, and of course the children who are gathered around here. Now, I've skipped over another kind of focus of the painting, which is this group here that are gathered around this man and the thing that's in front of him. And I'm just going to zoom back out just so you get a sense of the whole. So you can see nowadays the painting is called the Fish Market, Patrick Street, but when it was first exhibited in 1893, Osborne titled the painting Life in the Streets, Musicians. So what did he mean by musicians? Well, he was really talking about this final group here. They're gathered around a barrel organ. And we know from kind of documentary sources that there were a number of barrel organs in Dublin at this time, often run by Italian families, many of whom had settled on one of the side streets just off Patrick Street. So it's really interesting, even though that's not what we think of when we think of the painting now. It's this really fascinating into a glimpse of a kind of small part of the history of the Liberties as well. I'll just show you one of the sketches because it's my favorite one. There's lots of sketches for this painting, but I think this view of the fish cellar is particularly beautiful and particularly kind of characterful as well. The way that he's just roughly sketched out the face and the gesture as well. Um, that wasn't the only name change that this painting went through. So it was first known as Life in the Streets Musicians. It was later exhibited as the Fish Market, and then in brackets, now demolished for Lord Ivy's improvements. And so Osborne's painting, after the kind of project of widening the streets began of moving the market to the Ivy Market, on Francis Street, and the character of the street changed, and Osborne's paintings became part of the historical record for that kind of part of the city. So it's an interesting kind of afterlife for his works. It wasn't just the exterior environs of St. Patrick's that he was interested in. Osborne also painted the interior. So, for example, this one, a scene of maybe two choir boys in the cathedral. We are looking at the Jones Monument here. It's kind of near where the kind of ticket office is in St. Patrick's now. They're looking through a box of music. We've got this beautiful sunlight coming down and the door up to the cathedral tower. And he also was a reader in Marsh's library. So he really spent a lot of time in this area. This is a painting from the Hugh Lane collection of the interior of Marsh's library with our four gentlemen hard at study books on the table. What's really fascinating is that in Marsh's library they have the reader registers, and Walter Osborne's name is there, and just under it, on one of the days he visited, the next name is Stephen Gwynn, so perhaps they were there at the same time. But also, if you go to Marsh's, this exact chair is still there. This style of, maybe not the exact one, but this style of chair is still what they use. And this bust is still over the bookcases, and of course the windows haven't changed. So we've got, even though this is painted a long time ago now, this wonderful connection to the building and how it looks today as well. Now, he wasn't, even though he spent a lot of time in this area, he did, of course, move beyond it from time to time. And this is probably one of his other kind of best known paintings of Dublin. This is the Dublin Streets, A Vendor of Books from 1889. So again, if we're thinking about his work changing, it's a little bit more expansive, a little bit more of a wider view of the city. Lots going on here, lots of detail. But we might think a little bit of, why here, why this junction with O'Connell Bridge, the Custom House in the distance, and the quay. I think, Osborne was very clever. He thought about where he wanted to show his work, who it might appeal to. And this view of Dublin was one that was often mentioned by guidebooks to Dublin. So even if people hadn't visited the city, if they had picked up a guidebook, they might have, read about it, might have seen it there. And I'm just going to read you a little bit again from a guidebook from the 1850s. It says that this view has a beauty arising from the numerous lines of wide street that radiate from our feet. So they're standing on O'Connell Bridge. The windings of the Liffey, with its keyed walls and ample avenues on either side, by the various public buildings that from this point are more or less displayed, the tapering mass of the vessels mingling with the ample outlines of the custom house, the finest by far of Eblana's structures. And we see that in his painting. If we look down towards the custom house, we have the masts of the ships here. Now, I think a reason that many of us really love this painting is, of course, it's painted before the Loop Line Bridge goes in, which was very controversial in its day, and really changing. And if we think of it now, if we're standing on the bridge looking towards the customs house, you would have the bridge going across with the dirt running across it. Everything is very crisp in terms of the more recent buildings, the widened O'Connell Bridge, looking very shiny and new. You have barges, boats. There's a great sense of the river as a site of industry. We have horses, carriages, people going about their business. The bridge is bustling. We also have these other things going on in the painting. So, of course, we have the presence of British Army officers, a red coat on a horse, a Scottish Highlander here, walking along the quay. And of course, when we get to 1914 and Bachelor's Walk, it's the Scottish Highlanders who are in that. So different times, but interesting that Osborne had included it. But I suppose our real focus is on this section of the painting here. This is the vendor of books, and with the bookstall here, with the flower seller beside, with her basket of flowers here, baby in her arms, and presumably this connected to this little girl who is offering daffodils to the very disinterested men who are crowded around this stall of second-hand books. There's such a great texture to this, even down to the little dog here, that kind of scratchy, short hair of a terrier. The basket here, kind of spilling over, the straw in the street. Again, quite, if you think about horses in the street, the straw, the manure, all of that, it's quite a pungent kind of scent that we might imagine going on with this painting. One of my favorite little details of Osborne's paintings, and if you do get the chance to see them in person, this is something nice to look out for. If you look here at the bottom, this little touch of turquoise here, this very small dab, thickly painted. There's another one in cream here. And it's these small details that really bring the painting to life. Even if you look here in the basket, these little touches of white and blue, when we zoom out, they're what bring the painting to life, the way that he's enlivening the picture plane. Moving out even further away, I suppose, in some senses, from Patrick Street is in the mid-1890s, a little bit of a change comes over Osborne's work. He moves his studio out of Castlewood Avenue to one of the houses on St. Stephen's Green. So this is around where Topshop used to be, if any of you remember it. If you're at the top of Grafton Street and take a left as if you're heading down towards Kildare Street, one of the buildings along there on an upper floor, he had a much bigger studio. And at the same time, and I'm not going to look at it this evening, but he's moving into more formal portraiture, but still doing some city painting on the side. This is one of the key paintings from this period. It's called In a Dublin Park, Light and Shade. You do see these patterns for how he's kind of naming his city paintings, but a really lovely kind of tableau of people sitting in the park in this kind of very lush, very green, very verdant setting. And we kind of get this sense of, going from youth, middle and old age here. Now, we do get the sense that life is not easy for any of these sitters, that they are not the kind of middle class promenaders of the park. They are people who have maybe nowhere else to go, or who are taking time out from a very hectic and busy life. And they have much more in common, I think, with the people we see in the Patrick Street paintings than people maybe living around St. Stephen's Green. I thought it was interesting. So, we talked about the Guinness family and Patrick Street, and actually going to the Green, Osborne didn't really escape them because it had been through the munificence of Lord Ardilan that the Green had been opened to the public. And when we read about the Green opening in 1880, redeveloped, reopened something for the people of Dublin to enjoy, the newspaper articles often are kind of contrasted the well-to-do people of the park with and I'm just kind of quoting, the hundreds of little children playing about with a look of unaccustomed pleasure in their poor, pale, pinched faces. Um, and how this author was going to realize how much the poor will benefit of having such a place of healthy recreation in their midst. So I think Osborne is picking up on some of those themes of the respite the park could offer people, but also the hardship that they were facing as well. This work is from the National Gallery. It's often on display. It's one people will know. But I just wanted to contrast it with this. This is an unfinished work, but very much painted around the same time and showing us some of the same people. It's a little bit more of a study than a finished painting, but we can see here our mother and child, and this man here with the bowler hat and the beard, very similar to our figure here. And it's in this work that we get the sense of, the different worlds coming together within the park. So we have muslin dresses, boaters, straw boaters, umbrellas, and these two children here playing with a hoop and a stick. We get this really interesting sense of a little ghost dog almost, not quite realized, just here with Osborne's signature under it. So again, just as we can picture him with the sketchbook on Patrick Street, you can also think of him, one of these people enjoying the park, maybe sitting, observing, making sketches as he goes along. Now, I'm going to bring us back to Rathmines and bring us back to the home on Castlewood Avenue. So I mentioned that when we get to the mid-1890s, we see a change in Osborne. He's moved his studio and he's working on more formal portraiture. And that is really because of quite a sad reason, which this painting represents. So if you remember earlier, I showed you the portrait of his sister, Violet, full of life. 2 years after that was painted, Violet had gotten married and had very sadly died, giving birth to her daughter within a period of around 8 or 9 months. So they have the wedding in Castlewood Avenue. Great reports. It seemed like a great wedding. She moves to Canada with her new husband, and that's where she dies in premature childbirth and giving birth to this little girl here, also called Violet. Violet, the young Violet, comes back to live with her uncle and her aging grandparents in Castlewood Avenue. And so Walter now has to kind of earn a living for all of them. And so he does his formal portraiture, but he also takes huge enjoyment in painting the kind of daily domestic life of the family home. And I think it's a lovely bookend to those early pictures of the children that he was painting in the studio earlier in his career. So this painting is called At the Breakfast Table, and this is in an American museum at the University of Notre Dame. But it's such a beautiful painting. So we have his father, William, here, his mother, Annie, and baby Violet. And you get all of that detail that he's been building and building towards in his painting. So the table, the cutlery, this little toy in front of her, this beautiful this cup, the glistening light on it, the bread, again, that kind of blue and white vase that we've seen before, a silver teapot, and this beautiful array of flowers. The sunlight is kind of streaming in through this, one of the front windows of the house. We see the kind of tasseled curtain. If we come behind their faces here again, we see little gestures towards those earlier works, the framed picture on the wall as well. And Violet, baby Violet, really became an important subject for him. Skipping too fast. This was the letter he wrote to her father, who stayed in Canada for a few years following his wife's death. And he's writing to him here with a sketch of the painting. And he says it's one of the best, he thinks it's one of the best paintings he has ever done, with baby sitting up at the table. This is, some of the preparatory sketches, and so his mother holding Violet. We also have sketches of his father holding her. And then this is a preparatory watercolor of her sitting on the chair. And again, we see some of those details in the back. So we just get this great sense of him doting on this child who's come into the house, and all of the love that she is surrounded by as well. These are two other scenes. So at a child's bedside, we see Violet growing up in his works, and also sometimes feeling a little bit poorly as well. So when we think of Osborne's paintings of Dublin, this is really the last one that we think of, and it brings together kind of a few different elements of his work. So it was painted in the garden at Castlewood Avenue, so we know the house had a spacious garden. But it also, there's details that he's very much drawing from his Stephen's Green picture, and the way that the light is coming through the trees, the green bench, and that kind of using the wall as a device. So he's, the little bits of artistic license going on here as well. You can see this is an unfinished painting. So the finished side of it, again, I'll zoom again. We have Violet a little bit older with I think it's a neighbor pouring tea. We see that silver teapot again. And the way the light is falling on it, the looser brush strokes, the use of color, this is what he's really been building up towards throughout his career. This side of the painting, the right hand side of the painting, is unfinished. And again, I'll just show you there. So maybe this was to be his mother sitting on the bench, and other children, neighbors' children, and playing in the grass. So Osborne was, from the 1880s, growing and growing in popularity. It was said that if you were a wealthy Dubliner, alive in the 1890s, or around 1900, 1901, 1902, if you were having your portrait painted, it had to be Walter Osborne. He was very expensive as a portrait painter, so he was making a very good living from this. And then in 1903, when he's aged just 39 years old, he cycles home from George Moore's house on Eli Place in the rain, and develops pneumonia. Now, I'm not sure if they're fully connected, but that's how the story goes. He develops pneumonia and dies very suddenly within a few days, right at the peak of his career. And this painting, Tea in the Garden, is really that tantalizing glimpse of what might have been, of what would he have done next. Would he have kept with this kind of looser way of painting? Would he have kept this color? Dublin is about to change dramatically. What would he have made of that? Would he have painted it? Would he have moved away from it? We really, and Osborne leaves us with all of these questions about the city, about art in the city, about life in the city. He would have been around all of those circles who will go on to support Hugh Lane and the opening of the Hugh Lane Gallery. And the answer is we just don't know what he would have done or how he would have seen the city if he had lived longer. But what he leaves us with is this great record of the, maybe a 20-year period of how one artist painted Dublin. So I'm going to finish there, but please, if you have any questions, I'm going to close the slides. Please ask them. Okay.
Well, Katie, I'm going to jump in there and say I was expecting a visual treat and I am not disappointed. Thank you so much for
No
bringing those
problem.
pictures to life for us. Those attention to detail, both on Osborne's part and yours, so complimentary. It was wonderful. Thank you.
No
Before we
problem.
move to the Q&A, I'm